This book has 6 chapters, and in the first chapter itself, I'm talking very briefly about what postcolonialism is, what postcolonialism does, what is the impact of postcolonialism, what is the end point of postcolonialism, and so on and so forth. I will not go into too many details. The conversation, instead of remaining light, will become stiff. I don't want that to happen. Now, within that context, I picked up 3 post-colonial thinkers who originally wrote in French. And that is why in the title you have Francophone Postcolonial Thinkers. Their names are Aimé Césaire, Frantz Fanon, and Albert Memmi. Both Césaire and Fanon have a West Indian connection, whereas Memmi is a Tunisian Jew. Now, the commonality amongst these 3 is that their entire discourse revolves around this colonizer, colonized dialectic. Let me take out dialectic from the picture and say that their entire discourse revolves around a reciprocal relationship between the colonizer and the colonized. Very briefly, what they say is that the colonizer concocts a discourse on the colonized in order to show them uncivilized, uncouth, barbaric, savage, and so on and so forth. And this is something which has happened around the world. All the non-European cultures have suffered the same fate as we have. So, the second chapter of this book actually talks about, their concerns, their academic contentions. And within that framework, James Mill fits very nicely, because as I mentioned earlier, James Mill's agenda was to show us uncivilized and uncouth. So the first 3 chapters of my book were complete. Once again, I do not know from where the inspiration came. Well, I do know from where the inspiration came, but for the sake of the conversation, I thought that I should read more on James Mill, who he was, what kind of individual he was. So I came across a biography on James Mill, which was published in 1882 by an individual by the name Alexander Bain. Alexander Bain, interestingly, was friends with James Mill's son, another illustrious figure, John Stuart Mill. We don't need to go into the details of John Stuart Mill, but this biography is a very detailed one. So as I was going through the biography, there were a few things that came into the picture, and I want to share them with you. James Mill was born in Scotland in 1773. His parents had shoemaking and shoe selling business. However, James Mill's mother had an aristocratic background. And because of certain political developments her family had lost aristocracy and she wanted to regain that aristocracy, and she decided to use James Mill as the instrument. Because of which, she was not interested in James Mill taking up the shoe selling and shoemaking business. She wanted to make James Mill a gentleman, her words. By that, she wanted to make him an aristocrat. James Mill was a precocious child, very good in studies, and his intelligence got recognized by the local aristocrats, and they decided to fund his education. So for his bachelor's and master's in divinity studies, he was sent to the University of Edinburgh, where he completed his studies in 1797. It so happened that he was not able to find a job as a preacher, and he struggled for the next 5 years. In 1802, he decided to come to London, which was a city of opportunities back then. Or rather, I should say that it had already become a city of opportunities by then, to try his hand in journalism. So, he became a journalist. He started writing on things. He was working for a periodical which allowed him to man the India desk, which meant that he was writing reviews of all the materials that were coming from India, all the translations that were happening by the East India Company, by the Asiatic Society, and also other materials that were getting produced by ad hoc individuals. What he figured out was that the information on India was very disparate, and that they all needed to be woven into a coherent narrative, which could be used for governance by the East India Company. He was politically astute and he was politically ambitious. And that played a massive role in the creation of the history of British India. And it is true that that there were many people who were writing about various things on India, but their contentions were disparate. They were not together. Different people were writing different things. And he also did not agree with the position that William Jones and his cohort had undertaken. He had another issue, which he wanted to settle. You will find the reflections of James Mill on Macaulay's Minutes as well. So in a certain sense, while I was having this meta retreat organized by Indika and Shiv Kumarji, and an individual by the name of Arun remarked कि Macaulay का भी कोई बाप हुआ करता था. It is true. Macaulay's बाप was James Mill. We talk about Macaulay's children and we talk about Macaulay, but nobody has actually explored the connection between Macaulay and James Mill. It is for these reasons that James Mill becomes so important. And I would like to add another thing. James Mill had a mentor by the name of Jeremy Bentham, who is considered the father of utilitarianism. And of course, he had an illustrious son, John Stuart Mill. What happened was that his popularity got sandwiched between these two giants. This obfuscation has had profound consequences for us, because the individual who's the numero uno of the distorter of our discourse completely disappeared from the scene. You know, nobody knows about James Mill. There are not one too many academic works that are available on James Mill. So that was another problem, you know, that happened. So he was hiding. So he had to be pulled out from his grave and exhumed.